His Excellency Dato Hassan Hamza, Permanent Representative of Malaysia, Chair of CDR. Exciting session. We are very delighted. But Rani, we must do. At the end of my speech, I'd like to respond to Ambassador Stephanie's question. But first I must do my obligation. Since its establishment, areas through its research and other related activities has been contributing to deepening of economic integration in the East Asia region and improving the resiliency of this region toward disasters and economic crisis. Astonishingly, from my memory, the first ASEAN summit statement, the word resiliency appeared. The first ASEAN summit is 1976 or so, 10 years after the establishment of ASEAN. Resiliency is really the word the founding fathers, mothers used. With strong support and instruction by Mr. Nihai, ERIA, the government of Indonesia and the government of Japan held the first ASEAN-Japan Symposium on building national resilience in ASEAN countries on 2nd April this year, 2001, in Jakarta, Indonesia. At the symposium, we shared Japan's and Indonesia's experiences and lessons from disaster. Said the symposium highlighted the importance of international cooperation and effective collaboration among the states, local governments, and the private sector as ultimately one of the most important factors in promoting national resilience. In the past 10 years, 150 disasters, which comprise about 40% of all world disasters, have struck this region. These have affected over 2 million people and have caused economic losses of 41.6 billion US dollars per year. As you are aware, a very big earthquake hit Nepal capital and caused severe damage to property and loss of lives. Let me here offer my condolence to the victims of this earthquake. Now, we have to understand that disaster in a country is not just an individual country's problem. Disasters also damage the regional economy as these affect production network in ASEAN and East Asian countries. This means that we have to cooperate to develop our resilience against disasters at the regional level and as a whole. The ASEAN established the ASEAN Coordinating Center for Humanitarian Assistance to Disaster Management, AFA Center, in November 2001. This center aims to facilitate cooperation and coordination among ASEAN member states and the international organization for disaster management and emergency response in the ASEAN region. Also, ASEAN established ASEAN Ministerial Meeting on Disaster Management as a platform for cooperation and collaboration with ASEAN dialogue partners and relevant international organizations. ASEAN has been also developing their mechanism toward building their resiliency to disaster. ERIA has been conducting many research projects and symposium to help build resiliency in ASEAN and East Asia. In 2014, ERIA conducted 3 research projects for disaster management, namely, number 1, policy index for disaster resilience. Number 2, disaster mitigating systems by using space and geospatial information technology in the ASEAN region. And number 3, mitigating supply chain risk due to natural disaster. These areas research projects and policy recommendations will provide solutions for strengthening regional cooperation toward building national resilience in ASEAN. And these research projects are noted by the EAS readers at the last East Asia Summit. Last year, ERIA's research outcome in 2013 were published by Springer under the Resilience and Recovery in Asian Disasters. This is a book. Yes, given the attention received from the EAS readers, ERIA has taken up disaster management as one of its flagship projects. Our research shows several important issues and challenges in managing disaster risk in ASEAN. One is in mitigating and preparedness. The key issues are assessing the risks and continuously working on preparedness. It should be performed at all levels, national, subnational, and community, including in the preparedness action, enrolling in risk insurance. Only 7.6% of natural disaster losses in Asia in 2013 were insured, compared to 67% in the United States. Risk insurance becomes important because it provides protection against uncertainty, promotes discipline for the insurer, and reduces the aftermath burden. However, the market mechanism does not exist in this case due to several failures, including high cost for risk assessment and behavior monitoring, low purchasing power for majority of people in emerging economies, and lack of understanding by potential consumers. The promotion of risk insurance requires support from the government. This brings us to the second issue, namely the provision of public data to be utilized by relevant stakeholders. In this case, especially by insurance companies. The publicly sufficient and necessary data will reduce assessment cost for insurance, and in turn will reduce premium cost for the insured. While we are facing with and recognizing those issues, ERIA just launched a project on disaster risk resilience policy index. We've already completed SME policy index, but the new index under the pillar of social, cultural, community efforts. This is aimed as a contribution to policymakers to do a self-assessment on the policy measures that influence a region's resilience. The composite index represents the resilience level at urbanized areas induced by adopted policy. Accordingly, the policymakers can compare and learn from other regions to improve resilience by adopting appropriate policy. ERIA expects that this index can be a useful tool to improve regional resilience. The ASEAN leaders are attending the 26th ASEAN Summit on 27 April 2005 in Malaysia underlined the importance of enhancing cooperation in disaster management and emergency response for the region to be better prepared to deal with natural disasters. The leaders also adopted the ASEAN Declaration on Institutionalization and Resilience of ASEAN and its communities and peoples to disaster and climate change. This declaration underscores the importance of building an ASEAN community that is resilient to disaster and climate change, viewing resilience as unifying. Now, the leaders realize that there can be no peace and stability and sustainable economic development without taking action on disaster management and in building national resilience. This is now ASEAN's common sense. In conclusion, let me remind you here that with the strong support of Mr. Nikai, Japan has declared 5th November as an annual Tsunami Disaster Prevention Day to promote understanding and interest in tsunami countermeasures among the public. I strongly hope that this important day will be shared with ASEAN and East Asia and desire or the ideal situation in 2026 is literally, maybe I'm much more ambitious compared with Dr. Pons. He pointed out the exact number, but I do hope that literally and really materialization of a single market and a single production base, which has never done in other world. That is my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Nishimura. Now, I would like to invite Professor Mr. Maramis to make some comments to address Mr. Nishimura.
Thank you very much, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It really is an honor for me to be here. I was supposed to be appearing in the earlier sessions, but then a session on this disaster resilience was added. And I thank OECD and ERIA for the privilege of being a discussant and to critique, in a sense, Professor Nishimura's remarks. And I feel, of course, very inadequate to do that, because really his speech was very much part of the title of this, which was inspiring. And if I could just bottle that passion and that emotion behind that, I think that would be all we would need. And I could sell it and be rich, perhaps, and that would be what we need. That is an essential ingredient in inspiring a community. I think we need that passion, we need that emotion. And it's people, partners, colleagues, friends of ASEAN, like Professor Nishimura, who makes this happen. But I'm here really to talk about, this idea of inspiring. I think in Professor Nishimura's thesis there are really a number of elements. We heard how international cooperation is an imperative, how regional mechanisms through the ASEAN Agreement on Disaster Management and Emergency Response is equally important. And advanced research and the policy tools are important, and behind that, political commitment. So this idea of resilience has to be founded on these very essential elements. And if I may take a minute to explore some of those components, I think, specifically on international cooperation, the imperative. I think Professor Nishimura has mentioned that don't underestimate the value of international cooperation and collaboration of states and local governments and private sector, because these remain a foundation. This multi-stakeholder framework, this cooperative and collaborative nature is fundamental to the success of resilience. Of course, resilience is not totally defined by natural disasters, but it is an important aspect because it is very much part of the ASEAN profile, that is to say, the risk profile. It's not just economic, as many of you are, representing the economic community, but it's also certainly in the disaster management. And in the core message in Professor Nishimura's speech was that natural disaster indeed is a core element of building resilience, and it has this multiplier effect. It has a multiplier effect in our policy community, the policy formulation, the opinion makers, the thought leaders in our communities. It has an impact, or it has a multiplier effect in the different practitioners in the disaster management community, and it's enlarging. The disaster management community is not just disaster management specialists, not the emergency responders, not the first emergency responders. It is also more and more and increasingly those that are behind the scenes sometimes. The climatologists, because that's an important aspect of disaster mitigation, as we know now. It's about adapting to climate change. And so this is a widening community of practice that we are talking about. Professor Nishimura's speech also touched on the element of managing or being better at managing knowledge and our research skills and infrastructure and architecture, and of course the technology behind that. So I really do appreciate Professor Nishimura's emphasis on the need for international cooperation and how he's seen a much larger basis for this type of cooperation. I think what's also important is the regional mechanism. And here ASEAN truly has established the means, the mechanisms that are recognized as advanced, recognized as one of the only regional mechanisms that is compliant to the Yogo Framework for Action. And of course that's now succeeded by the Sendai Framework for Action. So it's a regional mechanism that has as its core the ASEAN Agreement on Disaster Management and Emergency Response. So that is the legislative policy basis, as you might say. And in our disaster resilience architecture, we also see that the ASEAN Humanitarian Assistance Coordination Center, or the AHA Center, is very much the operational arm of this policy framework. It's at the very leading edge of this policy framework. And who determines the broad national, brings together the national interest, of course, is the ministerial meetings on disaster management, the AMMDM, which was also touched on by Professor Nishimura. He also touched on this idea of a multi-sectoral stakeholder partnership that is really the basis for successful resilience strategy. And here I want to talk a little bit about the One ASEAN and One Response principle. As you know, and briefly touched on by Professor Nishimura, is the fact that the ASEAN leaders have issued the declaration on institutionalizing disaster resilience in ASEAN, the communities, and its member states in disaster management and climate change. So what we see in ASEAN now is the idea, the advancing of mainstreaming disaster resilience and climate change adaptation in the concept of resilience. It's very difficult to be inspired by the idea, by the word resilience. We used to talk about being prepared. We used to talk about being there, being the first responders. So we've moved in ASEAN to the idea of a response that is united, a response that is effective and is coordinated. And this idea of one ASEAN and one response tries to capture this idea. And it really is going to be at the forefront of our disaster resilience strategy. Now, Professor Nishimura also talked about many important findings in ERIA, and of course in other organizations, but in ERIA in particular about the value of advanced research and the contributions that ERIA has given in the resilience and recovery in Asian disaster, which was a book that he had shown, and also underlining the importance of risk insurance, which indeed is very much an area that needs to be explored. It's still an area that needs a lot of discussion, and by nature it is a cross-sectoral area and needs a cross-sectoral response of finance, the insurance companies, and of course the communities that are affected themselves. And so one of the questions I would pose to Professor Nishimura is how do we try to allay or try to overcome some of the cultural biases of having insurance. I mean, insurance is not something that comes automatically in our societies, at least some of them which are very rule-based. They have looking at basically day-to-day, sometimes a day-to-day existence. So one of the areas to explore is how culture, and Dr. Pons was talking about that identity, that cosmopolitanism. Is that an answer in trying to bring out ensuring is about ASEAN being one with ASEAN and responding as one. Is that one of the ways to overcome some of that cultural biases? ERIA has extolled this idea of a disaster risk resilience policy index, and I think from our perspective in the social cultural community, this is something to be explored and examined very closely. It looks at particular urban characteristics of resilience, because we are in ASEAN becoming much more urbanized. Some 80% of us will be living in the cities within 20, 30 years or so. So this idea of this urban resilience policy index could be an important contribution to this. And I'd like to have Professor Nishimura's ideas about how he feels he can maybe further disseminate the idea. Now, from year to year, the ASEAN leaders have emphasized disaster management, and it really has been this year where that connection between disaster management and climate change adaptation has been, in a sense, realized in this bold ASEAN declaration, which is really about a whole of government approach, a whole of society approach in tackling our disaster risks and our climate change adaptation needs. So these are some things that will be more and more important. I think the statement will really, in a sense, should be the foundation of a rallying cry to mobilize our communities, because in the end, those most affected are the more vulnerable communities, the women, the children, disabled people. Those are the ones that when we talk about resilience. So we often don't talk about vulnerability when we use the word resilience, but it remains an issue among disaster management professionals, and certainly in the climate change adaptation community as well. Finally, Professor Nishimura talked about this idea of a Tsunami Disaster Prevention Day. I think this is again something that really should be further explored by ASEAN, by the larger international community. Tsunamis are a real, present threat. They're not something that are imaginary. We've seen the destruction and the human destruction in particular that is caused by tsunamis. We see how there are compound problems, like in the Fukushima area, how that, together with the importance of not just preparedness, but local community building efforts will be very important. So we should join in His Excellency Mr. Nikai's pronouncements to rally around this idea of a Tsunami Disaster Prevention Day, which they do in Japan, incidentally. It is already a recognized national day, but it's something that, given our recent experience with tsunamis, that will be very important. Finally, I just wanted to say again, Professor Nishimura, you have helped to add that little bit of something special in this symposium. The idea of trying to inspire communities to be much more resilient. It's an uphill, sometimes an uphill challenge. It's very difficult, and as I said earlier, the words resilience and preparedness are not in themselves inspiring terms. But we need to be continuously looking at how this can be done, because in the end, as we saw in Tacloban, in the post-Haiyan, post-Yolanda typhoons, it has been the local communities that are the most vulnerable, the most affected, and they're the ones that capacity building efforts need to be around. Technology has helped to bring a tremendous amount of hope and recovery in that, in terms of crowdfunding, in terms of rallying support, in terms of focusing and targeting assistance and relief supplies, and even in terms of finding ways to rehabilitate communities for building smarter and better communities and homes. This is something that we need to be doing. Disaster management and climate change, while very difficult as terms to inspire, I think the fact that we live in a region that is disaster prone, that it will be affected by climate change, probably the most affected in climate change and among other regions. We need to find, the challenges for us is to find those elements, that rallying cry, that vision that is needed to inspire us around becoming much more resilient. I think Professor Nishimura's words need to be thought, need to be further examined and discussed. And I hope this is an important start in this process. Thank you very much, Professor. So with that, maybe Professor Nishimura, a few thoughts about perhaps about how you see the evolving international cooperation around disaster resilience, but how does disaster resilience in particular, how can it be, what kind of contribution will it make in terms of this inspirational value that it has to the ASEAN community? Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. He is a real comrade for ERIA to fight a last 1 mile program to complete AC 2015. AC 2015 is facing remaining a lot of difficult problem without the concerted dedication of ASEAN member states cannot be materialized. In this sense, ASEAN social cultural communities' successful achievement is inevitably important. In this sense, we are fighting together to cope with remaining problems. As far as cultural diversity or diversification in this region is not the problem. That is a real source, asset for innovation. Different culture and fascinating each other and desire to know each other will surely lead to the real innovation in 21st century. So we must deserve this very valuable cultural diversification that is an engine for ASEAN. Under these kind of the diversification, we can go into the different approach, different world. And I have explained one example, the disaster index. Important task for ERIA is how to materialize from unknown to the known, and the social cultural community activities. various important issues, but very difficult to evaluate objectively, to share, to do the policy package in order to make it materialize, crystallized to readers. ERIA must make, for example, SME policy index, 60 items. It is very difficult before that to evaluate each country's SME policy, but also under the social, cultural, community matters, nobody has established some index area in cooperation with ASEAN Secretariat to make more the materialized index to evaluate the value of the social, cultural, the community for the development in the future. What ERIA believe is a many part of the development of society could be solved by economic policy or economic policy sense in cooperation with education, climate change, the labor mobility, women's empowerment, everything to reduction of poverty. ERIA, as much as possible, offer the materialized economic policy tools, making a variety of index of etc. In line with resiliency, not only includes the disaster, natural disaster, including the economic disaster. Economic shock is also a matter of resiliency. We have the most advanced production networks here, and based on ERIA's research, this production network is most resilient to the economic shock from outside ASEAN. In this sense, the ASEAN structure of the society could be very resilient by the policy package and the future development ASEAN social cultural community. That is my inspiration, triggered by our comrade Maramis' the comments. Yeah, thank you. Respond. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Nishimura. You see, this is what I mean about this emotion and passion. I think if we can capture and bottle it, I think that will go a long way. Professor Nishimura has highlighted this notion of the social cultural community, and some of you might be puzzling as to what this exactly is, and maybe it's an opportunity to explain that a bit. And of course, the social cultural community is one of the pillars of ASEAN, and we need to be looking at. We are looking at an ASEAN that engages and benefits people. So really looking at being able to deliver the kind of services that the people need, to be much more inclusive, to include the vulnerable groups, to be looking and giving opportunities and protecting human rights. And of course, our concern in the social cultural community is to ensure that development as they proceed is a sustainable one, and of course resilient, and captures the dynamism, the essence of cultural diversity that Professor Nishimura was talking about. I think important words behind what Professor Nishimura has said, at least to me, is that inherent in the cultural diversity of ASEAN societies is that very fact that that resilience is part of that. It's very much part of that makeup, that outlook in life and worldview that actually has made us the kind of community that we are. I think this is an important message from Professor Nishimura. Professor, I think I've been told that my time is up, our time is up, and I really enjoyed listening to you. Again, seeing that emotion and passion on display for all of us, because it really is it's catching, it's contagious, and it's very important for us. It's very good to see a friend of ASEAN to really be that so emotional and very knowledgeable. ERIA's work in collaboration with ASEAN has gone a long way. The social cultural community has recently received lots of support in terms of think pieces led by Professor Pon Sintal there, who has provided many important think pieces and ideas around a much more robust social cultural community, and we appreciate that. This year will be a very critical year for the social cultural community, not only in terms of contributing to the ASEAN community, but also our involvement in very critical international conferences like Sendai, which has recently passed. Up and coming will be Addis Ababa and financing development, another area that social cultural community will have to be, and other communities of course will be looking at. And of course the Sustainable Development Goals will be wrapped up, as you may, in September in the General Assembly. And then we cap off this year with the Climate Change Conference of the Parties in Paris. And don't forget, in Istanbul next year, in March, there will be the World Humanitarian Summit. So we do have a series of conferences internally in ASEAN. We'll have a lot of processes that will all be converging. So the challenges to Malaysia, we'll have to bring these all together. It naturally will be very heavy burden for it. But like Dr. has said, there will be friends, there'll be partnerships, there'll be other member states that will be very much behind this. And I think, as Professor Nishimura has said, we will address these challenges head on and become a much stronger community. So with that, thank you very much. I'm sorry to take too much of your time already, but I think Professor Nishimura's address was something that we certainly could not let go. So once again, thank you. Let me please a round of applause for